These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
This is Unconventional Times. I'm your host, Richard Gordon. Thank you for joining us today. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas forces invaded Israel and slaughtered over 1,200 people, men, women, children, babies. They also took 251 hostages. Since that time, Israel has pursued an end to Hamas in Gaza through a continued military offensive. The Gazan health minister has claimed that 66,000 Gazans have been killed, a number that cannot be confirmed or verified. With us today is an expert on the Middle East, a friend for many, many years, Tom Nides. Tom Nides was the United States ambassador to Israel from November 2021 to July 2023. Before that, he served as Deputy Secretary of State under President Obama. He was formerly the Chief of Staff to the United States Trade Representative and a key advisor to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. When Tom isn't serving his country full-time, he's been a banker. He was the Vice Chair of Morgan Stanley, and he currently is the Vice Chairman for Strategy and Client Relations at Blackstone, which is one of the world's largest investment firms. Ambassador Nides, welcome to the show.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Nice seeing you.
Always great seeing you. Hey, let's start with October 7th, if you don't mind. Like most of us, you must have been shocked, but not like most of us. You had just served about 2 years as ambassador. So how did you hear about it? Were you shocked? Did you think this could ever happen to Israel?
Well, ironically, I was actually in the UAE. And we were celebrating the Abraham Accords. I was a guest of Miriam Adelson. And now Miriam and I don't agree much on anything political, but she did invite me to the UAE. It was actually for an all-star game for the NBA because she had just, as you know, just had purchased the Mavericks. Yes, and the Timberwolves, where I'm from, Minnesota. So she'd asked me if I would come. And I came with Yusuf Al-Attaba, who was, as you know, one of the architects of the Abraham Accords. And not only that, but a variety of Jewish leaders and NBA players. And literally, we were sitting at a hotel in Abu Dhabi, clicking our glasses about how great the Abraham Accords was and how much success it was in the direction of normalization and the possibilities of the Saudi normalization. And literally, 4 or 5 hours later, we started getting the news reports of what was going on in Israel. And I remember Ted Deutsch and I were sitting at the hotel and said, "Oh my God, this is way more complicated than we realized." At which point, obviously, we didn't go to the game. We both all got on airplanes, flew back to the United States to begin what ended up to be the most horrific attack on Jews, as you know, since the Holocaust. And I think it is, for me, as the former American ambassador. Listen, I'm a liberal Jewish kid from Minnesota. I'm not a religious guy. I grew up as youngest of 8 kids. From a Midwest town. My father was head of the UJA and the temple. You know, we were 2 times a year Jews. We went to synagogue. It wasn't like I grew up like this rabbinical scholar or had any idea to ever be the American ambassador to Israel, I assure you. But it was the most difficult period of time for me, someone who's been involved in public policy, was the ambassador, had been at the State Department. And for me, as someone who considers himself a true Zionist, it began a very, very, very complicated 2-year journey, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute.
How do you think it's changed Israel? I have friends who just got back and said they feel that Israel has a sense of invincibility, this sense of we could deal with anything. There's no threat too big for us, whatever. People say it's really changed fundamentally. Do you feel that?
Well, I've been back many, many times since. In
Sure.
fact, I'm going back in a couple of weeks. I was there 3 weeks ago. We got to put this in context, okay? Because I think it's really important, and I think it's one of the reasons I'm able to speak at a lot of college campuses and speak both to religious Jews and the most left Jews and non-Jews, Arab, Palestinian kids who I talk to about this. We got to put this in perspective. You set up the stage correctly. the worst possible crisis to the families that were affected on October 7th. 1,200 Jews, non-Jews as well, were killed on October 7th. Many of those kids who got killed were at a concert. Okay, they were young people. These were not, these were mostly young kids who they broke into a concert and slaughtered these kids, and then grabbed hundreds of other, older people, younger people, and dragged them to Gaza. Okay, I don't think anyone would ever want, I don't care what your views are, Israel, about the Jews, or about Arabs. No one should ever go through what these families are going through. As someone who speaks to these hostage families on a weekly basis, as I do, the torment is beyond anyone's imagination. So I think Israel will never be the same, and I think how Israel has now attempted to try to prosecute this war is coming under an enormous microscope, and we'll get into that, I assume, in this conversation, and justifiably so, because in any war that you have to understand how you execute the war is as important as the war itself. But there's no question that Israel has never suffered the kind of this essential kind of pain that the country has. Every single Israeli has suffered here, because every single Israeli either has a family member, or a cousin, or a relative, a brother who was killed on October 7th, or was taken hostage, or their brother or sister is now fighting in the IDF in Gaza. So it's hard for people in America to understand every single person is affected, okay? And obviously that's also true with the Palestinians in Gaza, and every single Palestinian and every Gazan is affected. So everyone's affected in a way that obviously is unimaginable.
You must have been in a million security briefings and whatever while you were ambassador. I mean, did you ever, I'm sure you've dealt with everyone at the IDF, at the Mossad, at every place. I think the world was shocked that this could even physically happen. Was that
I actually hosted, interestingly, I just hosted Ronan Bar, who was the head of Shin Bet and was let go by Bibi about 5 or 6 months ago. I hosted him at my house in Washington a couple of weeks ago with the whole Biden national security team, the former national security team. And obviously we talked to him about that. I won't disclose exactly what we discussed, but let me just say to you, my view is very simple. This should never have happened. Okay. This was not the Yom Kippur War, guys. This was a ragtag operation. Yes, they had some planning. They knocked down a fence, and I think ultimately they were way more successful than they anticipated. Okay, this was not a fine-tuned military operation. This should never have happened. They needed to have an inquiry to find out how it happened. This is the IDF. This is Shin Bet. This is the same group of people who did the Hezbollah beepers, and did the Iran thing, and the Yemen and blowing up the Houthis. So this should never happen. Okay, so if anyone thinks that it should have happened or they saw it happen, that's just complete crap. The reality of this is it shouldn't have happened, and there's a lot of people responsible for that, and including, I think, the prime minister and all the military operations. Many of the members of the military have resigned or have been fired, and they need to have an inquiry, which has not happened yet. So I don't think anyone had. And I think the reason for that is, now this is my view, having spent enough time, hundreds and hundreds of hours to your point, with the security forces in Israel and all the people around it. They had in my humble view, the Israelis had a failure of imagination. I don't think Israel ever believed that Hamas would be this stupid, okay? Because every time Hamas, when I was ambassador, they'd shoot rockets off in Israel. Israel would beat the crap out of Hamas. This was a tit for tat that would go on for 2 or 3 days, sometimes a couple of weeks, and there'd be a bunch of flurries of diplomacy, and it would end, okay? And I think the reality is, I think Israel believed that Hamas wouldn't be this stupid, do something this significant. They knew what the reaction would be from Israel, right? When a kid goes and punches a big bully in the playground, they're assuming they're going to get the crap kicked out of them, okay? And I think in my humble view, the failure of imagination with Israel is that Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian people. Just so everyone understands this, and I say this to my most liberal friends, okay, who are protesting and talking about how Israel conducts itself. Who made Hamas God to determine that the lives of innocent Gazans and Palestinians should be sacrificed for the larger cause? And that is what the disconnect that Israel was. They didn't realize that Hamas doesn't care if tens of thousands of innocent Gazans die. Okay, and again, we'll talk about Israel and what's going on with it, but as you know, Hamas, and they'll say this, it's about martyrism. It's about the larger cause. But no one made these Hamas leaders the decider if I should live or I should die. But they made that decision because they knew the reaction when they took 250 hostages from Israel. What do you think? Israel wasn't going to do everything it can to get the people back? Come on. And Hamas would say, and by the way, Hamas's goal was first to start a regional war, okay, get the Iranians and the Hezbollah, the Houthis all to join in to destroy Israel. That didn't happen. Okay. The second objective was to turn the world against Israel. And to be clear, on that measure, they've been pretty successful.
They have been.
And so I think so as a guy who like is pretty balanced about all this, and people should understand before we talk about how this war has been conducted. I think it's really important for people to understand that the fundamental issue is that Hamas's whole desire to basically to be martyrs and to create that was their goal. But quite frankly, they should not be the judge and jury on these kids, these men and women who are dying in Gaza. And it makes me sick to my stomach on that.
You know, when we look at world history and different situations somewhat akin to this, the people have risen up. You know, the people have risen up against the people who are oppressing them, but we don't see that at all in the Gaza.
A little and hard, Gus. Just so people don't die on this nonsense like you and I did on nonsense. But the history.
We focus more than others. Yes.
Yeah, right. We're all in. Okay. Remember, Gaza is the size of Chicago. Okay, right. A little less than Chicago. Okay. And Hamas, as you recall, Hamas ruled Gaza with an iron fist. As you know, there was elections 20 years ago. Hamas won, pushed the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza. So they're no longer managing Hamas, and they basically, not dissimilar to the Taliban, with very, very, very restricted conditions inside Gaza. And everyone, listen, I spent time in Gaza. I know Gazans. Well, the embassy had people there working, so it's not like I'm not oblivious to all of this, right? But they are a very, very strict and very fundamentalist group that were running Gaza. So you would assume that it's now happening. There was a bunch of polls done the last couple of days about this potential peace agreement, and basically the Gazans are saying, what I'm saying is, stop, enough. Cease. Everyone is dead. Enough. And I think that's why I've been such an advocate at the end of this war. But Hamas obviously needs to basically agree. And Israel needs to stop the war.
I want to get to the war. I want to get to aid to Gaza. I want to get to all that. But I want to talk about Tom Nides first. Talk to me about your journey. I know so much about what you did after October 7th. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Listen, again, I don't want to. There's so many people who did so many more cool things than I did. Listen, I went to Israel as the American ambassador. Again, one of the reasons I spent a lot of time with the Arab community when I was there and was a huge advocate of a two-state solution, because I could actually talk to both the most religious Jews as well as the most left-wing Jews, because I'm not particularly ideological when I think about this. And I fundamentally believe we do need a two-state solution. I think the Arabs need to have a voice. And I also believe I do nothing to compromise the security of the state of Israel. So if your fundamental view of this is, I'm not going to compromise the security of Israel, but I believe the security of Israel is determined in having this group of 7 million Arabs and 7 million Jews living side by side peacefully. You can't do that. You can't coexist without having the rights and responsibilities of both individuals or both groups. So I come back from as the American ambassador, and obviously, as I mentioned, the October 7th thing for all of us shook me to my core. And unless you spend time with the families, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, working on this, as you do, as I do. I speak out on campuses. I try to be understanding about where both the Israelis, to your point, how they feel. Even the most liberal Jews, obviously, are very, very focus on not only ending the war, but getting the hostages back, and fundamentally believe that Hamas needs to be destroyed. The flip of that is, trying to be able to spend your time and energy working on behalf of what I now believe is a huge problem for the American Jewish community, and quite frankly, anyone who cares about Israel. We have lost a whole generation of kids here. We should be honest with ourselves about what's happened here since the war. And you need people who are speaking about this in a way that's articulate, but also be able to understand where they're coming from. You got to meet people at the moment. And if, every time that some kid or the, potential, the next mayor of New York articulates views that I may disagree with, that somehow, I can, call him or her an anti-Semite, is ridiculous. Okay. You can have different views. You can blame Bibi Netanyahu. You can blame Israel on some of the things that have happened here. But you have to be really careful not to fall into this trap that you then cross the line of anti-Semitic behavior. So I think it's a complicated, and I try to, as just one voice, one small voice, to try to understand where people are and where they're coming from, and to try to get to what we need to do. And that is a huge amount of damage control and recovery that needs to take place, which is why this war needs to end and should have ended, a year ago.
Well, I want to get to the political ramifications at some point, but let's get to the war first. Israel has conducted numerous offensives. They launched a new one, I think, on September 18th. I mean, every night on TV. It's like, Tom, when you and I were kids, watching Vietnam every night on the television, we're watching in real time.
Right, you're a little older than I am, so I didn't really watch.
Yeah, I know, but you've
I was
seen the
only 3 years
tapes.
old. I don't know about you, but at 3 years old, I was not watching Vietnam. But I hear you. I understand the point.
I
Sorry.
think I was 4 or 5. Yeah,
Okay, I just want
I
to be clear.
understand.
Just want
I
to make
got you.
sure so your viewers understand the age difference here. Okay.
Yeah, it is massive between us. It is. You're a young guy. Um, you are. Um, my point is that the war's been in our homes every night. It's on the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever. We are watching this in real time. And my question is, and I think this goes to what you were just talking about losing a generation of Americans as far as their support goes. Let's talk about the war. Has it been conducted properly? Has the Netanyahu government acted appropriately? When you talk to a lot of people, you hear all this stuff about proportionality, you hear about all this, they should have held back, they shouldn't do this, these are poor people, what are they doing? So my question really is, Israel has a tendency to always lose the public relations war. They do that all the time. Were they appropriate in what they did? And is it of concern that the public relations war has been such, honestly, a disaster?
Well, both can be true. Okay. So one is for sure. Hamas started this war. They started the war. Hamas could have ended the war at any time. Hamas could have given back the hostages, put down their arms, and ended the war. Okay, so
And Israel would have stopped.
make no mistake about this. Okay, so this is, and again, I'm going to talk about Israel's conduct here in a minute, but no one should misconstrue this. Okay, there's no equivalency of what Hamas did because Israel didn't support a two-state solution or they weren't getting the right assistance. Hamas decided to impose their will on the state of Israel by killing 1,200 innocent kids, a lot of them kids at a concert. So all the other crap you hear, just make sure everyone understands how we got here, okay? And by the way, Hamas, again, knew exactly what was going to happen to them, and they welcomed it. So they were the judge and jury. They welcomed it. They welcomed it. That's why they put their equipment in hospitals and put civilians in harm's way. They wanted this to happen, which is a bunch of innocent Gazans dying, okay?
You're saying they use them as human shields.
Of course. I mean, that's a given. This is not like, I'm not Tom Nides making it up. I'm not the IDF's, spin control. I mean, I'm going to talk about Israel in a second, but just so there's nothing that I say takes away from the fact that how we got here. Okay. Pause that for a second. I look at the war in different stages. Okay. And I was part of, I was involved in it. I was close to Israel. Obviously, I had left the ambassadorship before that, but they were all my friends of the Biden administration, and they were torn about how this war originally was conducted. The first phase of the war was to destroy Hamas, and basically they had international approval for that because of what Hamas did. The reality of this is they get the hostages back and destroy the military capacity of Hamas. This is where two things that I blame, and I've said publicly, I blame Israel for, okay? Not that they need to destroy Hamas. I'm totally in support of them destroying the military capacity of Hamas. Here is where I believe the second phase of this war went south, which is the prime minister defined success, not what I believe should have been the definition of success. The definition of success, which should have been October 7th will never happen again. We've made it sure by destroying the military capacity of Hamas that October 7th, by the way, should, as I pointed out earlier in the podcast, should never happen in the first place. Okay. Right. But he should have stood up and said to the Israeli people, my goal is to make sure October 7th never happens again. And I believe they accomplished that goal, a year ago. But he, for a lot of reasons, and I think some of them political, much political, from Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, his right-wing lunatics on the right wing, basically, he was then forced to define success. In my view, my personal view, I'm not representing anyone's view, but my personal view, as defined success is the complete elimination of Hamas, which I felt was ever achievable. Okay? To be clear, he never said that was the goal in Lebanon when he did the beepers and Hezbollah. He never said he was going to destroy all of Hezbollah. By the way, Hezbollah still exists in a form in Lebanon.
It was to weaken them, not to destroy.
Did not say that with the Houthis in Yemen, and he certainly did not say that in Iran by destroying, at least eliminating. We can debate how much they did and didn't do, and on the Iran nuclear capacity. So he made a decision to basically set up what success and convince half the country in Israel that was success. And I blame the prime minister for that, okay? Because he could, at the time after the Iran hit of Fordo, he could have gone to the Israeli people and said, we are going to leave Gaza, we're going to get the hostage back, and we have succeeded. October 7th will never happen again. So I believe that's number one. I think that was a fundamental flaw on the Israelis, not to take away in any way from what Hamas started and created the war. That was number one flaw. And the second was on the humanitarian stuff. In my view, it makes me sick, okay, that us as Jews are suggesting that we're not providing all of the assets they need to innocent Gazans. To be clear, make no mistake, there is no question that Hamas is making it very difficult to deliver food. And make no question that they are taking the food that's been delivered by a bunch of the UN organizations when they were in power and other organizations, making it very difficult for people to get. All true. No one, I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that Hamas is trying to use this commodity to make money. My humble view is when you get into a fight with a bully or get into a fight with someone who has less to lose than you do, you got to do whatever you can to change the dynamics. So this is where I fault the prime minister and his government. I would have flooded Gaza with more food and water and medicine, because guess what happened? You don't have to be a rocket scientist like you are to understand the value of a commodity declines when there's so much of the commodity.
Right.
So in my view, this is, and they'll say, well, we couldn't, we tried, we do. Okay. And then some would say, well, there's no real hunger issues in Gaza, which is absurd. And let's assume hypothetically they're right. Let's assume that this is all made up, which is not, of course, but let's assume. Then send CNN and the BBC and Al Jazeera and send them into Gaza and show that people are actually eating, plenty of food. So the two things I blame as a Zionist, as a lover of the state of Israel, was they should have defined the war in a different way, a different success matrix. And two, they should have done way, way, way better job on the humanitarian stuff. We as Jews are better than this, in my humble view. When I have to go sit at synagogue, which I did, and hear what's happened, it's not right. Okay. Again, it does not take away for the fact that what Hamas did to us and how they did it to us, and they created this war. They did it because they don't give a crap about the people that they're supposed to be, quote, representing of. But that, as you know, as a Jew, I cannot see myself, doing the things that make this situation bad for Israel in the future, and that is what's happened.
Yeah, I think if Israel did what you had said, this whole dynamic would have been different. I mean, could you imagine IDF soldiers handing out food to children? I mean, that would have been the front page story instead of what we have. So
Yeah, listen. I listen. It's easier for us Monday morning quarterbacks to sit here and listen. But I talk to these hostage families. They would say what I was saying. Now, at the beginning of the war, obviously there was some sense that they did us, and how could you feed these people, and making stupid comments like, everyone who lives in Gaza is a member of Hamas. That's just nonsense. Okay, that's just not right. Are there people among the population that are sympathetic to Hamas? Of course. By the way, I understand it. I'm not like I don't like it. I don't like it. It makes me sick to my stomach. But of course, when you define success as something is unachievable, that's just setting it up to prolong the war. And so from my perspective, again, there's one voice. There's plenty of people who have different views than I do, but I think ultimately, my belief is that's what the miscalculation was.
So you disagree with Israel, for example, this just a couple days ago, they turned the boats around that were trying to deliver aid. A third
I
of the
don't know.
boat.
Listen, guys. Listen. I'm not. As you know me pretty well, I'm not into symbolic stuff.
Right.
Symbolism matters plenty. I've been involved in campaigns. It's fine. They knew that boat was going to be turned around. It's dangerous for them to be there anyway. But I don't. There's so many bigger issues that I want. I want the goddamn war ended. Okay,
Right.
and I don't really care about a flotilla of a bunch of boats. I think it's fine. But I'd rather have the UN in there in a big way. I want more access to food. I want more access to clean water. The poor Gazans who are living in the south. They don't have the right sanitary conditions. That to me is a lot more important to me than a couple boats trying to float in and getting attention. Again, I'm fine with it. It is what it is. They knew what was going to happen. It's a distraction.
Yeah.
What we should be focusing on is putting pressure on Hamas today to get them to do this agreement, okay, and end this goddamn war and move on and start rebuilding the lives of both getting the hostages back, whoever happened to be alive, and the bodies of, I talked to, my friend Ruby Chen all the time. His son, who was a tank commander in Gaza, was kidnapped, was killed. His body, all he wants is his son's body back. Can you imagine? I get upset when my kids miss their airplane to, some shuttle, right? All this friend of mine, all he wants is his son's body back. And so we need to end this goddamn thing, and we need to start rebuilding the lives both of Israelis and innocent Gazans, and get the Arab countries in there to rebuild at some point.
Just listening to this, I know how close are with former President Biden. Why was President Biden unable to convince Netanyahu to do the more humanitarian things?
That's a really good question, Rich. I think, I think,
I mean, they've known each other for
I
40
think. Listen,
years.
I've been in the room. I've been in the room with the prime minister many, many, many times. He's an exceptionally impressive communicator. He's worked with, I don't know, 500 presidents. And I think he convinces people that he's doing the right thing or will do the right thing, and just give me another week, give me another couple days. This got to happen, that's got to happen. In retrospect, obviously, we should have done a better job putting pressure, and so should the Trump guys. And by the way, so should have, Donald Trump in his first term and Barack Obama. Listen, I think we're all culpable here in some ways. And I certainly, when you see the suffering that's gone on in Gaza, it makes me sick to my stomach. And, we should have all done a better job to force Israel to do a better job. But, again, I also understand it from the Israelis' perspective, and, they have our hostages in tunnels, why should we be feeding people when they won't even give our bodies back and our hostages? Or when they kidnap 82-year-old grandmothers and won't give them back. I mean, there's an argument, and quite frankly, a lot of Israelis believe that. So why should we then be providing them food and water and everything else? The argument is, well, this is what we do. We're Jews. We do actually go the other way and do what we need to do. But there'll be a lot of examination once this war is over of how it was conducted and what we did or didn't do.
Well, let's turn our attention then to President Trump and let's call it the Trump peace plan. Um, as you know, he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Washington on September 29th, a few days ago, and they released a joint peace proposal, which included things like release of all the living and dead hostages in return for release of a couple hundred prisoners that Israel's holding, amnesty for Hamas, who give up their guns and agree to coexist with Israel, immediate aid for Gaza, and redevelopment of Gaza. And there was also a threat: if they don't accept this, Israel should carry out the rest of the mission and eliminate Hamas. What do you think, in principle, of the Trump peace plan?
I'm all in. And to be clear, just so clear, I was, as you know, there's probably no one who can be more critical of some of the behaviors of what the Trump guys do. But that said, when I think they do the right thing, I'm the first person to feel an advocacy for that. I was one of the most advocate supporters of the Abraham Accords. I gave, Kirshner and my predecessor, David Friedman, and the whole Trump administration credit for making Israel safer for the Abraham Accords. I have said publicly, I even went on Newsmax a couple days ago and said that I fully support the Trump peace plan. I should be clear not to be that guy, but it's not a particularly new plan. Much of the elements of the plan was articulated by Secretary Blinken right before he stepped down, but I don't care. It's, I give, Jared Kirshner credit for actually insisting in getting engaged with Witkoff and getting his hands dirty. Getting in the middle of this game, as you know, because we've both been practitioners, is not easy and not pleasant. And I really do compliment Jared Kushner, because I think ultimately he doesn't need this. And I think getting involved is really important. He cares deeply about it. So I'm very, very supportive. So the reality of this is that the elements of this has been articulated, which is basically to stop the war. Okay, stop the war, get the hostages back, begin a process of rebuilding Gaza. Again, I think it is. I will do anything I can to get this war ended. Okay, because everyone needs to end this war. And as I pointed out earlier, we should have ended this war a year ago, but we are where we are. And I think fundamentally, it's now in Hamas's hands. And I think the president's right to say, I mean, it's sad to me, but if Hamas doesn't get the joke here, which is, by the way, it's over. I mean, and by the way, if they want to declare they won, that's up to them. I mean, arguably on some measures, they probably did win the war. If their goal of winning the war was turning the world against Israel, well, maybe they've succeeded. So it's quote, take the win, if that's what you've declared as a win, and then give the hostages back and let's get moving forward here. But it's this is going to be, remember, the problem also is Hamas now isn't the Hamas of 2 years ago. The leadership has been destroyed. It's a bunch of factions. It was unclear exactly how much control the Qataris have over those Hamas leadership that exists in Qatar, how much real role they have or control they have with the operations on the ground. But time will tell. I would have expected they should have had an announcement today. But again, they're dragging this out as well.
Well, the last thing I saw was that they want to make changes to it and amendments and add different things. To me, I don't totally understand why they would accept it, in the sense of it seems like total surrender. It seems like the Japanese at the end of World War II. If you lay down your arms, we won't bomb, the heck out of you. But it's hard to see why, if, Tom, you just said that they don't care, they could care less about their own people. If they don't care about their own people, what do they care? It's really about their survival, isn't it? Why would they accept this?
Well, I think it's a very good point, but I do think you've now starting to see that I think, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, that there are in many countries that people rise up, right? I think you're beginning to see that in Gaza. Now, mind you, there's only a couple million people that live there, so it's not a huge number, but it's a very small geographic area. So I think we've reached that tipping point. But listen, we might be in a situation where that's true. I think the difference here is the Qataris, and I do not to be that guy, but the Qataris have an enormous amount of authority here, and now they're sort of on the hot seat, right? They're now the focal point of, they did this negotiation, they praised the peace deal, they said they should accept it. All of the Arab countries have said they should accept it. I don't think there's an outlier of an Arab country. So I think like, a little bit of when you're kind of trapped, you have to figure out what to do. And I think ultimately, Hamas will, figure that they have very little options. You're right. But if at the end of the day, you have nothing else to lose, you just keep it going. But at that point, I don't, I mean, sadly, the people who get screwed every time are the people who have nothing to do with this. So there's a little, a Gazan, a 14-year-old Gazan, what the hell does she have to do with this war? Why should she be killed? Why should the hospitals be destroyed? They had nothing to do with it. And you say, well, tell the Hamas leaders just to give up. Okay, stop it. Stop. They have won whatever definition of success is. Let's say they won. They say turn the world against Israel. Okay, this ragtag operation in Gaza. Let's assume they won. Okay, I'd be more than happy to say Hamas did something that hasn't been done in 50 years or 74 years, is basically turn the world against Israel. Okay, so next, we're Jews. We're supporters of Israel. We'll get through it. We'll rebuild. We'll operate. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, an enormously important ally of America. They have the values that I share in many, many cases. They have a democracy. They have the social fabric of this country that half the country goes and protests every other weekend. That is what we support. That's what we want, and we'll get through it. I just want this war to end.
What do you think about this board of peace that President Trump wants to set up with him as the chairman? I mean, I found it interesting in reading the document that he talks about himself as Donald Trump, not as President of the United States.
I could care less. Guys, I do not spend a lot of time worrying about this crap, okay? Here, if Donald Trump wants to be the president of the Gaza reconstruction, God bless him, okay? God bless him. I could care less. It's irrelevant to me. What is not irrelevant is I want the killing to end in Gaza. I want the hostage families back. I want to begin the healing process to basically get Israel back into where it should have been and always has been, is a bipartisan support around the issue around Israel. And that's what I want back. So if Donald Trump wants to be the leader and wants to be the developer and he wants to do whatever he needs to do, I could care less. Okay, I just want the war over.
What about Netanyahu? What's his future? What happens? People say there might be elections in February. From my friends in Israel,
I spent an enormous amount of time with the prime minister, and I always had a very frank, positive relationship with him. Okay, I think something changed after the last elections. I think that the
American presidential elections or his election?
No. His election prime minister. This is the sixth time he's prime minister, and right. I think the reality is and I would not meet with either Ben Gvir or Smotrich. I think that the idea of the prime minister having 14 votes of a 61 coalition by two individuals who are not who Bibi Netanyahu certainly was that I knew of, right? He was never a conservative, Likud, right wing, whatever you define it as. These guys are basically fundamentalists. They fundamentally believe in the greater Israel. They believe in what they define as Judea Samaria, the biblical word for the West Bank and Gaza. Their ideology is so far to the right of even Bibi Netanyahu, and unfortunately, because of the war, and because of their support, I fundamentally believe that the prime minister, in many ways, was kidnapped by these guys because the prime minister, in my meetings with him, focused on two things before the war. Two things. Iran, okay, and normalization with Saudi Arabia, but the two things he was fundamentally focused on. He never was the guy who said, oh, let's take over the West Bank, okay? Well, let's take over Gaza. That never was his theme, okay?
He kept building settlements.
Well, but so did, by the way, so did Bennett. I mean, I had this fight with both Bennett and Lapid and Bibi, when they were all three of them were prime ministers when I was ambassador. I know all of them quite well, and we this constant fight. But we'd pound on him, and he would pound back, and we'd get them to stop. But no one in the government was as crazy as these guys that he's got in his government now. I mean, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are a cancer to the democracy of the state of Israel. Okay, I've said it 100 times. And I fundamentally believed it, and I think they pushed Bibi. Then obviously the war happened, and obviously the biggest crisis since the Holocaust was face the prime minister, and he had a lot of that, and by the whole country moved to the right. No one should be under any misunderstanding. The whole country's moved to the right, given the fact of what happened out of October 7th. So the prime minister, listen, the prime minister's not a young guy either. He's in his late 70s. He'll have to decide if he actually runs again. I think in my view, not that I know anything, I think there's a case that he decides not to run again, given whatever it is. He can't really, if he runs again, it's hard to imagine he gets the 61 seats, which you need to be prime minister. I'm not sure on today's fact, the opposition can get to 61 either. So, you get to the stalemate again, and maybe there's a coalition government emerges. I'd be all in. I think having people from the left and right, I was very close to Mansour Abbas, who was the Arab who was in the government during the coalition. He's a really
wonderful
guy.
House?
I went to his house multiple times.
Right,
I love his
remember
kids.
that.
He's great, and that's what the beauty of Israel is. There's 10 million people that live in Israel. 2 million are Arabs and Druze and non-Jews. I mean, people forget that Israel itself is a huge melting pot in itself, and I'm a huge supporter of those, those Arabs who got themselves involved in the Knesset and want to be part of the solution, not so part of the problem.
You were quoted in 2023 as saying that the Israeli democracy is vibrant. It's a lot of people don't believe that anymore. A lot of people say it's not true and that they've lost a lot of their democratic rights, etc. But that contrasts directly with the right to protest and whatnot. You still agree with what you said in 2023?
Oh, 100%. Guys, listen, think about this for a minute. There are about 9.5 million people live in Israel, okay? 2 Saturdays ago, 300,000 people went to the streets, okay? 300,000 people went to the streets. So just think about that for a minute. That's probably like almost, let's call it 5.5 to 6% of the country, okay? Just think, we have 300 million people living in the United States, okay? So you figure, you just do the math, okay? Think about the numbers of people that would have to come to the United States of the equivalence of what they had in Israel. Okay, it is a remarkable, loving, unbelievably complicated democracy. Okay, I sat at those protests. I went to a protest 3 weeks ago, and hundreds of thousands of people were there. By the way, no one gets arrested, no one gets killed. They block roads, they go on strikes. I mean, is there any other Arab country in the Middle East? Is there any country in the Middle East that would allow this? Okay. Is it perfect? No. Hell no, it's not perfect. Hell no, it's not at all perfect. But the reality of this is that when you look around the Middle East, they're as close to us as any other country in the Middle East. It's imperfect, obviously. They've gone through an enormous amount of consternation. They're surrounded by its enemies. They're certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a living, breathing democracy, and that's what's beautiful about the country.
You mentioned the West Bank a few minutes ago, but as ambassador, you refused to go to the West Bank. Why?
Well, I actually did. I just didn't make a big deal of it. Well, first of all, I went to the West Bank. I purposely said I wouldn't go to the settlements. That's what
right.
The State Department didn't want me to go to the West Bank, period, and I ignored them. Okay, so I did it anyway because I remember I had a lot of friends who were in the West Bank. I had a bunch of Arab friends. The head of the Bank of Palestine is a very good friend of mine. I knew a bunch of the people there. I cared deeply about that. I set up a bunch of hospitals and education opportunities because I fundamentally believe the Arab population, the Palestinians, just want the same goddamn thing as we want, us Jews. They want education. They want healthcare. They want opportunities for their kids. It's always the case. It's the small percentage of the people who cause 90% of the problems, okay? It's just not fair. And I refuse to buy in this idea that all Palestinians are terrorists. What idiot would say shit like that. Okay, it's completely and utterly moronic. Okay, and to be clear, so I fundamentally believe in my heart of hearts that I wanted the Palestinians, those who live in the West Bank, to have more job and more opportunities in Israel. When I was there, 300,000 Palestinians worked in Israel every day. Every day. They cross the border. And by the way, it ain't easy, okay? The security checkpoint, they get on a bus, they have to get off the bus, they have to go It's not easy, but they came and worked in Israel. October 7th happened, everything changed. I think if 5,000 Palestinians work in Israel now, that'd be a lot. The reality of this is that we need to do a better job, okay? And I fundamentally believe that. The settler community was way more complicated for me. They were Jews who went to the West Bank, expanding where they lived. I don't believe every settler is a bad person, quite the opposite. But I don't necessarily support the settler community as it relates to, because I do believe at the end of the day, I'm a supporter of a two-state solution. And more of the communities that get taken over by the settlers, the chances of having a two-state solution becomes less, which is why they develop more settlements. No kidding. So again, as someone who cares deeply about it, so I did go to the West Bank. I just didn't go to the settlements.
Well, then talk to me about Palestine. What's Palestine's future after the war, and what's the future of Abu Abbas, and who comes after him?
Okay, so listen again. I in every speech I gave, I talked about the importance of a two-state solution. Okay, is it realistic? I don't know. I mean, it's not happening now, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about it and setting up the problem with
Why
people.
not? Why not?
Because,
Why can't Palestine and Israel come to a two-state
okay,
solution?
okay. Again, let's just step back. We can all be dreamers, and I by the way, and I advocate big time, because the only way you're actually going to have a long-term solution, you need a homeland for the Palestinian people and a homeland for the Jews. Okay, I say it all the time in every speech. But in the meantime, there's a lot of shit that we should be doing. Like, how about education? How about healthcare? How about jobs? How about opportunities? And so my liberal friends, and consider myself a liberal guy. We talk about all this stuff, this idea of a two-state. I'm all in. I'm all in. In the meantime, what are we doing to better the education, the opportunities, the schools, just the access of Palestinians who live both in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, access into Israel? What are we doing about the universities? I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on the simple issue around shekels in West Bank. They don't have their own currency; they use shekels, but for a whole variety of reasons,
Israeli shekels.
Israeli shekels. The Israeli banks won't accept the shekels. They accept like a bunch of them every month, but not enough. The banks in the West Bank are overflowing with shekels. Okay, and because the Israelis say, well, it's we don't know where the money's coming from, and it's money laundering. And so I would spend all my energy screaming at the Bank of Israel, take more shekels, okay? So they can then don't have to have this, because the banks get robbed and the shekels get destroyed, all that sort of stuff, right? I was actually doing something. I was actually trying to do something. I got, when Joe Biden came for the 10th trip to Israel, I got him to go to the East Jerusalem Hospital, which is the biggest hospital supporting Arabs, both in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And the Israeli government said, we don't want him to go. We don't want him to go. We don't want him to go. I said, bullshit. He is going. Okay. He is going to go. And we gave $100 million of USAID money before USAID was shut down to basically rebuild part of the hospital, with the condition we got a $100 million matching grant from all the Arab countries. Okay. That's real. That actually changes people's lives. So yes, as much as I say I support a Palestinian state, I support a two-state solution, I'm all in, okay? But I don't want to be dead by the time this stuff, in the meantime, there's a lot of blocking and tackling, including getting the goddamn war ended, rebuilding Gaza, rebuilding the lives of the people that have been destroyed, making sure that Israel does not annex the West Bank, okay? Before we talk about this beauty idea of a two-state solution, we got people in this Israeli government whose goal is to annex the West Bank. And if it wasn't for the Emiratis getting the Trump guys to put pressure on Bibi, God only knows what was going on. Okay. So again, I am just a practical little Jew. Okay. I'm just like a kid who's like, I'm not ideological. I want to make life better. Okay. And yes, do I think overall the only way to ultimately solidify this is have a homeland for the Palestinian people? 100%. In the meantime, Rome is burning. Okay. So as we're out with our little hoses and like trying to put out the flame, Rome is burning. So I'm much more interested in the stuff that I can control and get done than some of the issues which I'd like to have happen, but are not going to happen tomorrow.
I remember meeting with Netanyahu when he was opposition leader and him talking about changing the economics of Palestine. And it sounds that's like where you're going. If you improve their lives, there'll be less reason for them to oppose Israel. I mean, that's sort of what.
I mean, come on. I mean, listen, I mean, again, unless you spend time there and spend time, go to their houses, talk to the families. Again, these are not all terrorists. Okay.
Right.
In fact, very, very few of them wake up in the morning and say, oh, wouldn't that be cool to kill a few Jews? It doesn't happen that way. But you're talking to someone who went to every single Israeli whose family got killed by a Palestinian terrorist. Okay, I never
Well,
done
not only
anything like this
that,
about it.
not only that, but you also went to the Shiv. Well, I don't know what they call it for Shireen Abu Akleh,
Yes,
the
okay.
Arab journalist who was killed.
From Algiers, I did, and so I. But again, forget it. It's not what's about me. But I the pain,
But why'd you
the
do it?
suffering.
I mean, you were a different type of ambassador than anyone before you.
Yeah, let's not get carried away. But I
Oh, you
listen,
were.
guys. I mean, here's why. Okay, here's why. And I go back to what I said before. This is how I grew up. Okay, I didn't grow up as a religious Jew.
Right.
Okay, I didn't grow up. This was not my life ambition. I grew up as a cultural Jew. You know what that means? I just care about people. Okay, I care about people. I care about their lives. I care about their humanity. I just want to do the right thing. I don't have like, yeah, of course, I'm politically involved and all that sort of stuff, but I don't look at this in like black and white terms. So I could go to an Arab family's house who was an Israeli who someone got killed, and I could go to a Haredi home. That would be the black hat Israeli families, and hold the hand of the father and tell them how sorry I was what happened to their child. Again, I'm not a pro at this, I assure you. But if you are not ideologically focused and you're focused more on the humanity piece, you're capable of doing this stuff. So for me, it was just an important thing to do.
Let me shift you in the little time we have left. You raised the concept of anti-Semitism in the United States. You raised the protests. You raised what's going on college campuses. Talk to us a little bit about that. Talk to us about how we stop it. I know I understand what you're doing. The president has obviously taken actions against Columbia, against Harvard, against other places. How do we, first of all, make people understand what's going on? But how do we deal with the anti-Semitism? And you also raised the issue of Mandami in New York City, probably the next mayor of New York, and the things he has said about Israel.
We have to be careful here, and we have to be careful as we do name associations. Okay, so you could stand up, as I have, and be critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And again, I don't have a personal, I have some personal anger towards him, but I have a personal relationship with him. But you can say that. And you can also stand up and say, I'm not happy with the conduct of Israel as a whole, as generically as Israel. But you better be damn careful not to go to the third step, which is, you know what? I have a problem with Jews. Okay. And that's what we're facing. Okay. So you can be angry at Bibi Netanyahu, and you can protest Bibi Netanyahu, and you can even protest Israel, because we live in a free society. Okay. When you go to the next step, which is the byproduct of maybe the first two steps, and you equate that with Jews, and that triggers people's behavior, that's when I say, sorry, guys, zero tolerance for that. Okay. Now you can protest as much as you want about Bibi and Israel, but you start crossing that line, and that's where I think we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism behavior, because everyone is not as capable of making comments without taking actions, and people's actions are disgusting. So I think where I have a little problem with this administration is that their focus on anti-Semitism as a reason why to clamp down on these schools, my hope is that really is their principal motivation. Okay, I worry sometimes that is in some times in some of these schools more of a stalking horse for some other things that they're trying to do around liberalism, about teaching, about affirmative action, and I get worried that as an American Jew, that we're being used in some cases as the reason why you want to do these things at these universities. Again, I certainly am an advocate of clamping down on anti-Semitism. I am not an advocate of clamping down on people who want to protest the Bibi and the government or even Israel. I just have a very, very difficult time when people decide to take that as an excuse to go after the Jews in particular and American Jews. And obviously you saw the tragedy of the Yom Kippur War, what happened. And so I think we got to Yom Kippur, and we just got to be really, really diligent.
Democratic Party it used to be lockstep in step with Israel. That's changing dramatically. As a Democrat, as someone who's worked in politics, where does the Democratic Party go?
We got work to do. Okay, we got work to do, and this is where I believe why the war needs to end. Okay, the war needs to end. We need to rebuild the lives of the Israelis who have lost their families and the hostages back. We owe it to the families of Israelis and the Israeli soldiers who have been killed in this war. We owe it to those people. We owe it to the innocent Gazans who got caught between Hamas, these animals that are treating the Gazans as if they were like tools in their propaganda, and obviously the folks who have been harmed in the meantime. Okay, and then we have to step back and repair what is in fact a real let's by the way, to be clear, it's not just liberal Democrats. You got plenty of the MAGA right who are upset about Israel. Okay, so let's not get carried away here. This is just a Democratic issue. But I don't care about politics. We have to figure this out. I care about humanity. I care about ending this war. I need to end it tomorrow. We need to rebuild the lives of the people who have been destroyed. And then we will deal with the politics of the matter, okay? We'll deal with the politics of the matter. And the people on the right and the people on the left, we have a role to build this idea of a consensus, a bipartisan. Matt Brooks is a friend of mine. He runs the Republican Jewish Committee, who's, he's a great guy. I mean, I don't agree necessarily politically, and he'd probably hate me even bringing up his name on this podcast, but he's a really decent person. And he and I, we both agree. Yes, he would like to get more Jews to vote Republican, and I like to have more Jews vote Democrat. That's totally legitimate. Okay, I don't think either one of us want Jews basically being against Israel. Okay, I think we would be more than happy to give up our political leanings to make sure that didn't happen, and that's what I'm afraid is happening both on the right and on the left. But we have work to do, and the one way to fix that is to understand you got a problem. And we don't have to fix that. But first things first, we got to end this war.
Give me 1 minute on the government shutdown, what it means for the American people, and does it affect our
here's the deal. I'll be good. It's ridiculous, okay? We are the United States of America. Okay, I sound like Joe Biden, okay? This is ridiculous. We're shutting down the government. Listen, I don't, this is like the debt ceiling, okay? We're better than this. That we have to shut down. I mean, think about the havoc that's causing. Like, you and I are going to be okay. We're to be able to pay our American Express bill. I was part of the shutdowns when I worked for the Clinton administration. I know what this feels like. But to be clear, I was always capable of paying, my next week's rent. Okay, there are many, many, many government employees who do live paycheck to paycheck, and when they don't get their $3,000 that's lining in their bank account, they're panicked, okay? And they're like calling their relatives. The level of havoc that this creates in people's lives. For what? Okay? So listen, I am obviously understand the Democratic position that the cuts on healthcare are real, okay? They're real and they're upset and they need to deal with it. I think the Republicans actually would be more than happy to deal with these cuts because I think they're also feeling the pressure. I mean, as Thune would say, he would like to do it. But now what's happened is they believe they have a gun to their head, and it's all about the Trump thing. So at the end of the day, this will get fixed. It could be 2 weeks from now, but it will get fixed. But the amount of, again, going back to humanity of it all, the idea that people are going to bed tonight, okay, worrying about how they're going to pay their MasterCard bill for what comes on the 15th of the month is unbelievable. Okay, that they're worrying about this, and these guys, the men and women in the Congress, need to sit down and figure this out. Okay, and I can do my whole political thing and who's responsible stuff, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just saying it's insane as the United States of America with $7 trillion budget. This is what we're doing.
I know you have a lot to do today and you're very busy. Let me ask you one last question. Just based on everything we're talking about, you still have hope for Israel? Still have hope for the Middle East? Still have hope for peace?
Oh, 100%, guys. Listen, Israel's a young little country, 76, 77 years old. It's a living, breathing democracy. I was there 2 weeks ago, as I mentioned, spoke at the Jeffries conference. It's a startup nation. Every company was in Israel, every U.S. company, all the entrepreneurs. They'll get through it. They'll get through it. I mean, it's painful. But we have one goal here. Okay, the goal is to end the war. The world is to end the world and begin the healing. And there's just an enormous amount of healing that needs to take place on both sides, and that needs to happen. And my hope for the Jewish New Year is that within the next couple of days that we'll get some sort of deal done here, and we can begin the healing.
Tom, can't thank you enough. I really appreciate, I mean, just spending time with you has been a lot of fun for me. So thank you so much. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for being on Unconventional Times. As I tell my guests, Tom, stay unconventional.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it, my friend. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So our guest today is Tom Nides, shows what a difference one person can make through the force of his personality, being warm, funny, outgoing. He was able to bring people together. He proved that by showing up, by meeting with people, regardless of whether he agreed with them or not, you can create a meaningful dialogue. In representing America, he showed Israel, the Middle East, and the world a different face of our country. As he has said in the past, his mission was to, quote, turn the heat down. He did that. We can use a lot more of that right now. So thank you for listening to us. Remember, you could watch us on YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. That's YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. You can hear it on podcasts wherever you get them. Thank you very much for listening to us. Stay unconventional.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.